The morning sun had barely crept above the camp's guard towers when the familiar sound echoed across the yard, the shout of the mail clerk. Usually, mail call meant letters from Germany, thin envelopes scrawled with shaky handwriting, stained with tears, often filled with words of despair from families still trapped in ruins. The prisoners both dreaded and longed for those letters. But on this day, in 1944, the routine shifted. The clerk's bag bulged heavier than usual, and when he reached into it, the envelopes looked different. Sturdy paper, larger, many stamped not with German addresses, but with American ones. Confused murmurs spread among the German POWs. "From home?" someone asked. "No," another whispered, frowning. "Look at the writing. It is English." The clerk began to call out names. One by one, prisoners stepped forward hesitantly to receive the strange envelopes. Some refused at first, convinced it was a cruel trick, but the guards urged them on, faces unusually gentle. Anna, a young auxiliary from Bavaria, took her letter with trembling hands. The envelope bore no German city, no familiar family name, but a return address from a small town in Iowa. She stared at it in disbelief. Why would an American write to me? Back in the barracks, she sat on her bunk, surrounded by others clutching similar envelopes. Some tore theirs open eagerly. Others stared, paralyzed by suspicion. Anna slid her finger under the flap and unfolded the paper. The letter was written in careful German, the handwriting neat but foreign. "Dear friend, my name is Margaret. I live on a farm with my husband and 2 children. We were told you are far from home, and though we do not know you, we wanted to send a letter to remind you that Christmas is near and that even enemies are human in God's eyes. We hope you are warm and have enough to eat. Please know that not all Americans hate you. I send prayers for your safe return to your family." Anna read the words twice, then a third time. Her vision blurred. An American woman, a stranger, whose husband might even be fighting her own brother at the front, had written to her with kindness. Around her, the same shock rippled through the barracks. Some men laughed nervously. "It is propaganda," one scoffed, though his hands shook as he held the page. Others wept silently, clutching the letters as though they were lifelines. For years, they had been told Americans were brutal, heartless, monsters without mercy. And yet here, on paper, in ink written carefully across miles, came voices of mothers, farmers, children, and pastors who spoke not of hatred, but of humanity. Over the next days, more letters arrived. They came from church congregations, school children, farm families who had heard that German prisoners lived in camps nearby. Some wrote out of curiosity, others out of pity, and some out of Christian conviction. One man read out loud from his letter, his voice trembling. "We pray for peace. I hope you are treated kindly where you are. My son is in Europe now, and I imagine there is a mother in Germany who prays for him just as I pray for you." The barracks fell silent. Hardened soldiers bowed their heads, unable to speak. Another letter came from a boy of 10. "I send you this drawing of our farm. These are our cows. I hope you will see them someday. My teacher says even prisoners need friends." The crude crayon drawing passed from hand to hand, rough lines of barns and cattle, softening eyes unused to such innocence. Yard time changed. Men once sullen and suspicious now gathered in corners, translating bits of English with those who knew the language better. They practiced new words, repeated phrases, marveled that American children knew their names. The letters did not erase guilt, nor did they end the war raging across oceans. But they cracked something inside the prisoners, a wall built from propaganda and fear. Anna wrote in her diary, "The letter was not long, but it undid me. To be seen not as an enemy, but as a woman, a daughter, someone with family. It was more than I could bear. I cried until my hands shook. I will keep it always." Some prisoners responded, carefully writing in halting English or in German that they hoped would be translated. They wrote about their families, about farms and villages that no longer existed, about the longing to go home. To their astonishment, some Americans wrote back. Friendships, fragile but real, began to form across paper and ink. Months later, when the war ended and the prisoners prepared to return to Germany, many carried those letters home like treasure. They were folded carefully into pockets, tucked into diaries, hidden under clothing. Back in the ruins of their homeland, they showed them to mothers, wives, and children. "Look," they said softly, "even in America, there were people who thought of us. Not all hearts were full of hate." For some, the letters were the first seeds of reconciliation, fragile bridges across oceans of blood and rubble. And for Anna, the words of Margaret from Iowa never left her. Long after she stepped off the train into the broken streets of Munich, she would sit by candlelight and read again, "Even enemies are human in God's eyes." She would whisper it aloud as if reminding herself, kindness had reached across wire, across war, across everything. The barracks, once heavy with silence and suspicion, changed after the letters began to arrive. Every evening, as the lamps flickered and the stove crackled, men gathered around a handful of prisoners who knew enough English to translate. They leaned in close, their shadows stretching across wooden walls, hanging on every word. One letter read aloud in halting German spoke of apple harvests in Ohio. The American farmer described climbing ladders into heavy branches, the scent of cider pressing, the laughter of children running between rows of trees. The prisoners closed their eyes and breathed in memories of their own orchards back home, orchards that now lay scorched or cut down for firewood. For a moment, they were transported across oceans into a life that still held seasons, fruit, and laughter. Another letter came from a pastor in Kansas. "We do not forget that Christ commanded us to love our enemies. We cannot stop the war, but we can remind you that hatred is not eternal." Some prisoners scoffed nervously, unused to hearing the word love from the enemy's lips. Yet others bowed their heads silent, tears gleaming in lamplight. The letters became more than paper. They were candles in darkness. Men folded them carefully, tucked them into boots, or stitched them into the lining of jackets. They were read until the paper grew soft, edges torn from use. In the middle of the night, when fear and homesickness tightened throats, men unfolded them again, tracing words with calloused fingers. One day, the guards announced that any prisoner who wished could write a reply. A stunned hush filled the yard. Could it be true? The enemy's families wanted to hear from them? At first, hesitation. Some muttered that it was a trap, others that no American truly cared. But slowly, courage grew. Prisoners lined up for paper and pencils, their hands trembling. Anna sat at her bunk with the blank page before her, the smell of ink sharp in the air. For a long time she could not write. What could she possibly say to Margaret, the woman from Iowa? In the end, her words came haltingly. "Dear Margaret, I received your letter. I do not know why you wrote to me, but I thank you. My family is in Munich. I do not know if they live. Your words gave me comfort I cannot describe. You reminded me that I am still someone's daughter, not only a prisoner. I will remember this kindness all my life." Around her, others wrote too. Some told of families lost, of farms burned, of brothers buried. Others simply wrote, "Thank you." Weeks later, replies arrived again. Margaret had written back. So had the farmer from Ohio, the pastor from Kansas, the school children with their crayon drawings. The bridge of paper stretched further, carrying fragile hope across an ocean of war.
When the war ended and the time came for repatriation, the letters became the most precious possessions in the camp. Men who owned nothing else clutched bundles of envelopes as if they were gold. Guards searched their bags, but even the strictest officers let the letters pass. They understood. On the last Sunday, the chaplain gathered the prisoners in the yard. He spoke of peace, of return, of rebuilding, and he read aloud one final letter written by a group of American families. "We hope you will return home safely. May you rebuild your lives. Remember that not all Americans were your enemies. Some of us thought of you as neighbors we had not yet met." The men wept openly, unashamed. Germany was rubble. Cities smoked. Children begged barefoot in streets. Mothers bartered heirlooms for bread. The returning prisoners stepped off trains into this desolation, clutching letters that smelled faintly of foreign paper, ink, and kindness. Anna returned to Munich, found her home a skeleton of charred beams. Her mother survived, thin as a shadow. At night, by candlelight, Anna unfolded Marguerite's letters and read them aloud. Her mother listened, tears streaming, whispering, "So even across the ocean there was mercy." For the rest of her life, Anna kept those letters in a box beside her bed. Long after food returned to markets, long after cities rebuilt, she would open them again on winter nights. She would trace the handwriting, hear the voice of the stranger who had once written to an enemy, and remember how behind barbed wire kindness had reached her. Among the prisoners was Otto, a former Wehrmacht sergeant, broad-shouldered and gruff. For months, he had scoffed at every sign of American kindness, insisting it was only strategy. Yet when his name was called and he received a letter from a farmer in Nebraska, his facade cracked. The letter was short, written in simple German learned from an immigrant grandfather. "I fought in the Great War against your fathers. Now my son fights in Europe against you. War repeats. But I do not wish for hatred to live forever. Someday, when you return home, remember that across the ocean a man prayed for you." Otto read it silently at first, jaw tight. But that night, his bunkmate woke to find him hunched over the page, shoulders shaking. For a man who had endured years without tears, the letter broke something open. He whispered hoarsely, "Even they pray for us. What have we done?" Perhaps the most joyous letters were those from school children. Written in crooked handwriting, adorned with bright crayon drawings of houses, dogs, or apple pies, they carried a disarming innocence. One prisoner unfolded a letter and found a stick-figure family holding hands beside a barn with the words, "This is us. We hope you have a family too." He pressed the page to his chest as if it were sacred. The prisoners tacked these drawings on the barracks wall. Amid gray wood and iron bunks, the crude colors shone like stained glass. Guards noticed and said nothing. Even they seemed moved by the sight of hardened soldiers gazing reverently at childish sketches. Back in Iowa, Margaret, whose letter had reached Anna, kept the reply she received in a drawer by her bed. She reread it often, marveling at the fact that a woman raised to see Germans as enemies had now exchanged words with one. She wrote in her journal, "I thought I was writing into a void, but now I know kindness crossed the ocean. Perhaps this is how peace begins, not with governments, but with letters." Other Americans felt the same. Farmers wrote to their neighbors about the strange gratitude of German captives. Pastors preached sermons on forgiveness, using the letters as examples. School children read replies aloud in classrooms, astonished that the men behind the barbed wire cried when they saw drawings of cows and barns. The act of writing had changed not only the prisoners, but also the senders. Hatred softened, curiosity grew. A fragile bridge was built plank by plank across ink and paper. As transport orders came in 1946, the prisoners faced departure with mixed hearts. Many longed for home, yet feared what awaited them. They had grown used to American bread, American civility, and, most of all, the letters that reminded them they were still human. On their last mail call, a final bundle was handed out. Some envelopes carried photographs, smiling families, children with puppies, farmhouses standing whole. "So you remember us," one note read, "when you return to rebuild." The men folded the letters carefully, tucked them deep into their coats. On the crowded ships back to Europe, when waves crashed and silence fell heavy, they pulled them out again. Words from strangers became anchors against despair. Germany greeted its sons with rubble and silence. Streets lay flattened, mothers starved, children clung to shadows. Yet the returning prisoners carried something their families did not expect: letters written on foreign paper, stamped with American towns. They read them aloud by candlelight in cellars, their voices breaking. Mothers gasped, "The enemy wrote this? To you?" Fathers shook their heads, whispering, "Perhaps we did not know the world as well as we thought." The letters became artifacts of hope, proof that not every hand across the ocean had sought only their destruction. For Anna, Margaret's words never faded. She married years later, raised children amid the rubble of rebuilding Munich. But in a small wooden box by her bedside, she kept the faded paper safe. Sometimes, when her children asked, "Mama, were the Americans cruel?" she would open the box and show them the letter. She would trace the words slowly and reply, "Some fought us, yes, but some wrote to us as though we were neighbors, and that saved something inside me." Her voice always trembled, but her children never forgot. In the long memory of war, battles and bombs are recorded in history books. But the letters, fragile sheets of paper carried across fences and oceans, became a quieter testimony. They proved that even in a time of hatred, strangers reached out with kindness, and enemies discovered one another's humanity. And for the German POWs, the surprise of those letters lingered all their lives, long after the barbed wire was gone.